In a slab of grey limestone, in one of the hottest, most isolated corners of Australia, scientists found something that shouldn't have been possible. Not fossilised bone. Not a mineral shadow where bone used to be. Actual soft tissue, the fossilised sperm cells of a tiny ancient freshwater shrimp, so precisely preserved that researchers could still see the nuclei sitting inside them, intact. The creature they came from had been dead for 17 million years. For most of the last century, this stretch of cracked red earth in North West Queensland looked like nothing at all. Dry grass, sun-bleached rock, the kind of country you'd drive past without a second glance, on the long, empty road to nowhere. But underneath it lay something that would force scientists to rewrite the story of an entire continent, a buried, vanished world of monster crocodiles, meat-eating kangaroos, and a creature so anatomically bizarre that researchers, genuinely unable to classify it, nicknamed it Thingodonta, the thing-toothed one. This is Riversleigh, and what has come out of its rock over the last 50 years hasn't just surprised palaeontologists. At several points, it has completely stopped them in their tracks, and in some cases, scientists are still trying to fully understand exactly what they found. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel, Hidden Origins, exists to dig into the geography, science, and buried history of Australia, the places so strange that most Australians have never even heard of them. Riversleigh is one of the strangest yet. If lost worlds and deep time are your thing, subscribe now, because we go looking for places exactly like this every week. To understand why Riversleigh matters, you first have to understand where it is, and just how unremarkable it looks on the surface. Riversleigh sits in the far northwest of Queensland, inside Boodjamulla National Park, close to the Northern Territory border, and roughly 270 kilometres from Mount Isa, the nearest town of any real size. Getting there means leaving sealed roads behind entirely. The bitumen gives way to dirt, then to corrugated red dust that billows behind every vehicle for kilometres. This is outback savanna country. Flat, dry, punishingly hot for most of the year, broken only by low stone ranges and the slow green thread of the Gregory River. Rising out of that flat country, in scattered patches, are outcrops of pale limestone. To a passing traveller, they look almost featureless jagged, sun-bleached rock, easy to walk straight past without a second thought. That's the entire visible mystery. Nothing on the surface hints at what's sealed inside. Even today, only a single outcrop, known simply as D-site, is open to the public. A short, self-guided walking trail loops up and over the rock, past a small information shelter built low and plain enough to blend into the landscape around it. It takes most visitors under an hour to complete. Walk it, and you can see actual fossil fragments still embedded in the exposed limestone beside the track, in a place that still receives only a trickle of visitors a year compared with Australia's better-known landmarks. Geologically, this limestone is the key to everything. Between roughly 25 and 15 million years ago, spanning the late Oligocene and Miocene epochs, this region wasn't outback at all. It was rainforest thick, wet and alive, threaded through with spring-fed freshwater pools. Year after year, as those pools persisted, mineral-rich water slowly built up limestone around anything that fell in and died. Leaves, insects, fish, and the bones of animals that lived, hunted, drank, and drowned along the water's edge. Layer by layer, over millions of years, the rainforest sealed its own history in stone. Today, the World Heritage listed section of Riversleigh covers just over 10,000 hectares, a relatively small footprint. But within it, researchers have identified more than 200 individual fossil sites, some barely metres apart. Each is its own frozen moment, its own slice of deep time. Riversleigh, in other words, isn't really one fossil site. It's a stacked, overlapping library of them, some older, some younger, together tracing millions of years of the same landscape's slow transformation. It's no accident Riversleigh is consistently ranked among the 10 most significant fossil sites on Earth, but raw numbers don't fully capture what makes it extraordinary. That comes down to the condition the fossils are found in. This isn't just bone turned to stone. Some Riversleigh specimens preserve soft tissue muscle fibre, organ structure, and, in one truly extraordinary case, fossilised sperm cells, complete with intact nuclei, from a tiny shrimp-like creature that died more than 17 million years ago. That level of preservation almost never survives anywhere on Earth. Combined with the sheer density of sites, it's why more than 60,000 fossil specimens, representing hundreds of species, have already been pulled from this ground, and why researchers are confident far more is still waiting beneath the surface than has ever been found. The Thylacine record alone is a useful measure of scale. Before Riversleigh, palaeontologists knew of just one fossil Thylacine species from this entire era of Australian history, aside from the recently extinct Tasmanian tiger itself. Riversleigh's rock single handedly multiplied that number, revealing several distinct, previously unknown Thylacine species, including one so completely preserved. A near-complete, fox-sized skeleton, that it remains the only full skeleton known of any Thylacine species other than the Tasmanian tiger. Long before any scientists set foot on this ground, the Waanyi people already knew this was not ordinary country. Riversleigh lies within Waanyi country, in the lower Gulf region of Queensland. To the Wani, this broader landscape the gorges, the permanent spring water, the ranges that include the Riversleigh fossil beds, is known as Boodjamulla. The name belongs to the being the Wani say shaped it, Boodjamulla, the rainbow serpent, said to have carved the gorge and its cliffs, and left behind the permanent spring water that still flows even through the driest months. That water isn't treated as an ordinary resource. Wani belief holds that if it's polluted, disrespected, or taken for granted, the rainbow serpent will leave and take the water with him. It's why the gorge itself is regarded as sacred ground, reserved for ceremony rather than casual use. This isn't a story attached after the fact for tourists. Archaeological evidence shows the Wani and their ancestors have occupied this exact landscape for at least 17,000 years, and quite possibly more than 30,000, making it one of the longest continuously occupied regions anywhere in Australia. Middens of freshwater mussel shell, grinding stones, and stone tools are still found along the waterways today. At Lilydale Spring, in the Sandstone Range just north of the Riversleigh fossil beds, there's a painted rock art panel of the rainbow serpent large enough to be seen from hundreds of metres away, among the most significant rainbow serpent depictions in the region, and still holding deep cultural meaning for Wani people today. The Wani were and are closely tied to this country's rhythms. In the wet season, families sheltered in caves and beneath overhanging rock. In the dry months, they camped along the creek banks under paperbark shelters. Fish, freshwater turtle, kangaroo myladii, in the Waanyi language and Goanna, made up the staple diet, supplemented with native fruit, mussels and palm hearts, gathered and hunted using tools, woven nets, and coolamans shaped for this specific country, and cooked in earth ovens of hot coals and stone. For much of the 20th century, Wani people were shut out of decisions about their own land, including the ground that would later become Riversleigh's fossil fields. When the area was folded into a national park, Wani people pushed back, forming an advisory committee to secure a genuine voice in how their country was managed. That fight for recognition led, in 2010, to the formal legal recognition of Waanyi native title over the region. In 2023, Boodjamulla National Park, including the ground beneath Riversleigh's fossil beds, was formally handed back to the Waanyi people, who now jointly manage it alongside the Queensland Government. There's something worth sitting with here. Waanyi knowledge of this landscape stretches back tens of thousands of years, carried and retold long before a single fossil was ever cracked out of the rock. Western science, digging into that same ground, has only in the last 50 years begun piecing together a timeline reaching back 25 million years. Two entirely different traditions, working on wildly different scales of time, arriving at the same underlying truth. This is country with an immense, layered past, and it has never stopped carrying meaning. The story of what's been pulled from this rock unfolds like a slow burning chain of discoveries, each one stranger than the last. The first hint came in 1900, when a European surveyor named W.E. Cameron noted fossil bones jutting from the limestone. Nobody followed up. For more than 60 years, the observation sat forgotten in a report, while the fossils themselves stayed exactly where they'd always been entombed in rock, in one of the most remote corners of the country. It wasn't until the 1960s that a small number of fossils were formally collected by visiting researchers, barely a beginning. The real turning point came in 1975 when Michael Archer, then a young mammal curator at the Queensland Museum, was told by the museum's director that he'd seen a fossil tooth sticking out of a rock somewhere out near the Gregory River. Archer would later describe the moment as one that nearly stopped him in his tracks. Within a year, in 1976, he'd organised the first proper expedition to Riversleigh. He has returned almost every year since, for close to 5 decades now, making it the longest continuously running palaeontological research project in Australian history. The finds came quickly after that, and they kept coming. In 1978, researchers uncovered Riversleigh's astonishing bat fossil deposits. Before that discovery, the entire known fossil record of Australian bats consisted of just 2 isolated, unidentified teeth. Riversleigh alone would eventually yield more than 35 distinct bat species, instantly making it home to one of the richest bat fossil records on Earth. By 1983, the project had expanded further still, with the team identifying 2 entirely new fossil-rich regions beyond the original site proof that Riversleigh's true boundaries were far larger than anyone had first assumed. What began as one curator and a handful of colleagues has since grown into a genuinely global effort. Today, more than 100 researchers, spread across more than 26 institutions in at least 11 countries, work on material recovered from this single stretch of Queensland limestone. Then, in 1988, came a discovery that still unsettles people who hear about it today. The bizarre creature researchers nicknamed Thingodonta, formerly named Yalkaparidon. Its skull and teeth matched nothing else in the marsupial family tree. Scientists were forced to create an entirely new taxonomic order, just to contain it, the only order of Australian marsupial known to have gone completely extinct, with no living descendants at all. In 1992, an almost perfectly preserved 15-million-year-old skull surfaced, Obdurodon dicksoni, an ancient platypus with a full set of teeth. It rewrote what scientists thought they understood about one of the strangest animals alive today. By 1994, the discoveries had become impossible to ignore, and Riversleigh was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Sir David Attenborough would later visit in person in 2001 and openly rank it among the most important fossil sites anywhere on the planet. Then, in 2014, came a discovery that stunned even seasoned paleontologists: fossilised sperm cells, 17 million years old, recovered from the reproductive organs of a tiny freshwater shrimp-like creature called an ostracod. Under high-resolution imaging, researchers could see the giant coiled sperm cells in extraordinary detail, and inside them, still intact. The nuclei that had once held the animal's chromosomes and DNA. At the time, they were the oldest fossilised sperm ever found anywhere in the geological record. But the deposit wasn't finished revealing itself. In 2012, researchers scanning satellite data noticed something strange. Patterns in the imagery that matched known fossil deposits, but in an area far beyond Riversleigh's official boundary. The area, quickly nicknamed New Riversleigh, turned out to be a vast, previously unknown fossil field. Within a year, researchers pulled a single tooth from limestone that had sat forgotten for years and identified an entirely new species from it, a giant, meter-long-toothed platypus, more than twice the size of any platypus alive today, with teeth powerful enough to crush small turtles. By 2016, New Riversley had produced its first formally named predator too, a hypercarnivorous marsupial weighing up to 25 kilograms that once stalked Australia's drying forests. And the shocks haven't stopped. As recently as September 2025, scientists announced yet another find pulled straight from Boodjamulla's ground. The fossil of an ancient relative of the modern lyrebird, somewhere between 17 and 18 million years old, fresh proof that even after 50 years of digging, Riversleigh still has secrets left to give up. Now, if you're waiting for this to turn into a story about aliens, curses, or something supernatural buried in that rock, keep watching. Because what actually explains Riversleigh's mysteries, and what actually made this land so dangerous for millions of years, is stranger and far more real than anything supernatural could offer. Make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to get into exactly what that means. When people hear that a patch of Australian desert has shocked scientists or hidden a lost world for millions of years, it doesn't take long for the rumour mill to start turning. Search online and you'll find posts calling Riversleigh cursed ground, tying it to alien visitation, or folding it into the same breathless anomaly zone language usually reserved for the Bermuda Triangle. None of it holds up, and it's worth being clear about why. Start with the most common misunderstanding, that any major Australian fossil site must mean dinosaurs. It doesn't. Riversleigh's fossils are almost entirely from after the age of dinosaurs, the Cenozoic, often called the age of mammals. What makes the site remarkable isn't a hidden dinosaur graveyard. It's an almost unbroken record of how Australia's mammals, birds, and reptiles evolved once the dinosaurs were already long gone. Then there's the mystery of Thingodonta itself, a name that, taken out of context, sounds like it belongs in cryptozoology. It doesn't. When researchers first pulled the skull and teeth of Ylcoparodon from the rock in the 1980s, they genuinely couldn't match it to any known marsupial family. That's not evidence of the unexplainable. It's exactly how real taxonomy works when a creature turns out to be a genuinely isolated evolutionary branch with no close surviving relatives to compare it to. Scientists didn't throw up their hands and call it paranormal. They built an entirely new scientific classification to properly describe it, the ordinary painstaking business of naming something new to science. That said, it would be dishonest to claim every question about Riversleigh has been settled. Some genuinely haven't. Nobody is completely certain what Ylcoparodon actually ate. Competing theories point to insect larvae, caterpillars, even bird eggs. And one detailed anatomical study proposed it may have fed the way a woodpecker does, levering into rotting wood after grubs. Decades after Riversleigh's giant flightless thunderbirds were first identified, palaeontologists are still debating whether they were purely plant-eating browsers or occasional opportunistic predators. These aren't cover-ups. They're the honest, ongoing edges of a young science working from limited fossil evidence, the kind of open question that exists at every genuine fossil site on Earth. As for why it took until 1976 for serious excavation to begin, more than 70 years after the first fossil bone was spotted, the explanation isn't secrecy or suppression, it's geography. Riversleigh sits hundreds of kilometres from the nearest major town, across terrain that's genuinely brutal to access even today, locked inside limestone so dense and difficult to prepare that specialised acid-based laboratories had to be built just to extract specimens without destroying them. Even now, freeing a single delicate skull from Riversleigh's rock can take a technician months of slow. Repeated acid treatment, a process so specialised and so costly that funding shortfalls have, at various points, threatened to stall it altogether. Riversleigh's hidden decades were never a cover-up. They were simply what happens when one of the richest fossil deposits on the planet happens to sit in one of its most inaccessible corners. Here's the reality. Nobody needed aliens or curses to make Riversleigh dangerous. 20 million years ago, this was already one of the most lethal ecosystems Australia has ever produced. Along its ancient freshwater pools patrolled Wani, a 5-metre apex predator crocodile with dagger-like teeth built for shredding rather than just gripping. Hunting alongside it were early relatives of the marsupial lion, smaller than the giant thylacoleo that would evolve millions of years later, but effective ambush predators in their own right, and a caltodetta, a rat kangaroo that, unlike its gentle modern descendants, actively hunted and ate meat. Above them, moving through the forest canopy and undergrowth, walked Dromornis morayi, a quarter-ton early relative of Australia's giant thunderbirds, dwarfing almost everything else that shared its world. This was not a peaceful rainforest. It was a fully functioning, predator-rich ecosystem, and the fossil record shows it in unflinching detail. Bite marks preserved in bone, the blunt mechanics of an ancient food chain frozen mid-motion. And the danger never stayed safely in the past. Riversleigh and the wider Boodjamulla National Park around it remains a genuinely hazardous place to visit today for entirely explicable, entirely modern reasons. The heat is severe enough that Queensland's Park Service closes the entire region for months during the wet season, citing extreme temperatures as a direct safety risk. Rangers warn that heat exhaustion can affect even fit, experienced walkers on the short fossil trail itself. The isolation is real and unforgiving. Reaching Riversleigh means hours on unsealed, corrugated dirt roads, with mobile coverage patchy at best and non-existent across long stretches, forcing visitors to be entirely self-sufficient and, ideally, to carry a satellite phone or emergency beacon. Even the scientists aren't exempt from any of this. Decades of Riversleigh fieldwork have unfolded in exactly these conditions, researchers quarrying fossil-bearing rock by hand, under a sun that regularly pushes past 40 degrees Celsius, kilometres from the nearest shade. Then there's the water. In March 2023, the region was hit by catastrophic flooding. More than half a metre of rain fell in just 2 days, roughly 15 times the normal rainfall for the entire month. The Gregory River, which runs directly past the fossil beds, surged to 18 metres, smashing a flood record that had stood since 1971. Roads vanished. Campgrounds were inundated. It took park rangers, working through brutal heat, several months just to reopen the publicly accessible fossil trail, while other sections of the same park, hit by a second record-breaking flood barely a year later, took far longer still to recover. None of this required a single supernatural explanation. It simply required understanding what this land actually is. A place of genuine, serious extremes, in the deep past and in the present alike, which makes the Waanyi's own relationship with this country, built on respect rather than fear, look less like folklore and more like people who understood, long before any scientist arrived, exactly what kind of country they were dealing with. Riversleigh doesn't need embellishment. Strip away any hint of the paranormal, and what's left is still one of the most extraordinary places on the planet, a stretch of ordinary-looking outback limestone that has quietly rewritten what we know about an entire continent's evolutionary history, one fossil at a time, for close to 50 years running. It's a reminder that the biggest revelations aren't always buried under mystery or myth. Sometimes they're buried under something far more patient, millions of years of rock, waiting for someone curious enough and stubborn enough to start digging. Even now, with hundreds of species already named, researchers say there is more fossil-bearing ground out there than anyone has yet found. 2 ways of knowing this country one carried in story for tens of thousands of years. The other pieced together tooth by tooth over the last 50 have quietly arrived at the same conclusion. This ordinary-looking stretch of outback has never been empty, and it is nowhere near finished revealing what it's holding on to. What do you think Riversleigh still has left to give up? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more of Australia's hidden, scientifically real mysteries. Subscribe to Hidden Origins. There's always something else buried out there.